Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to help you get up to speed fast on really crucial topics.
Mm?
And today, we're going to cut through all the noise around cybersecurity for small businesses.
Yeah, there's a lot out there.
There really is. You see the headlines, but what do you actually need to know? What are the absolute must-dos to protect your business right now?
Good question.
And interestingly, we're also going to unpack some, let's say, developments around the very agency often giving out this advice.
Right, that adds another layer to it.
It certainly does. Oh, and this deep dive is brought to you by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup, and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So if you're looking for secure, maybe ransomware-proof storage, Stonefly actually sells air-gapped and immutable storage solutions. You can contact sales at stonefly.com to set up a demo.
Okay.
So our mission today, basically distill the key cybersecurity steps for small businesses, and then try to make sense of this recent turbulence surrounding the agency that's guiding them.
Okay, let's unpack that first part, the guidance itself.
Yeah.
It's definitely true that the whole cyber threat landscape has, well, it's kind of flipped, hasn't it?
How so?
Well, forget just worrying about, like, using the Wi-Fi at the coffee shop. That's old news, mostly.
Okay.
The real focus now needs to be on how these attacks are actually getting through to small businesses today. It's different.
Exactly. And it's not just some, abstract threat for the Fortune 500s.
No, not at all.
What really jumped out at me was the focus on the CEO. It's not just, like, delegate security to IT and wash your hands of it.
Absolutely not. That doesn't work.
Did you see that statistic? Where if the CEO actually champions cybersecurity, the chances of a successful attack apparently drop quite a bit.
Yeah, I saw that. It really frames it as a leadership issue, first and foremost.
Plain and simple.
And building that security-first culture, well, it has to start right at the top.
So the CEO needs to be, actually talking about security.
Talking about it, yeah. Weaving security goals into, like, your regular quarterly business planning.
Like specific goals.
Yeah, concrete things like, okay, this quarter we get everyone on MFA, or we tighten up our software patching schedule, or we test our backups properly.
Yeah.
It needs to become, just part of the everyday business rhythm, not some separate scary thing.
And to help make that happen, they suggest appointing a security program manager.
Right.
Which sounds kind of formal, but it doesn't seem like they expect a hardcore cyber expert.
No, not necessarily. It sounds more like someone who can, project manage the whole security program, make sure tasks get done, deadlines are met, and importantly, keep the CEO and the rest of the leadership in the loop.
Like a coordinator.
Exactly. Think of them as the conductor for your security efforts.
Yeah.
And a really big part of their job would be developing and keeping up an incident response plan, an IRP.
Your playbook for when things go wrong.
Pretty much. For when, not if, right? And what's really interesting is the push for the CEO and leaders from, like, all departments, finance, HR, operations, to actually review and sign off on this plan before anything happens.
Yeah, you don't want to be figuring out the rules mid-crisis.
Definitely not.
And I like this other point, too. They suggest actually using the IRP, even if it turns out to be a false alarm, like a near miss.
Oh, yeah, that's smart. Treat it like a drill, learn from it, like how the airline industry uses near misses to improve safety.
Exactly. And they also really stress getting the CEO involved in these tabletop exercises. TTXs, what are those exactly?
So TTXs, tabletop exercises, they're basically cybersecurity fire drills, but, without the actual fire.
Okay.
The security program manager usually leads them. They'll present different made-up attack scenarios like, okay, ransomware just hit our main server, what do we do?
I see.
And you walk through the response step by step based on your IRP. Getting the senior leaders in the room actively participating, that's what builds the muscle memory for a real event.
Makes sense.
And it ties back to the CEO's role again. When the CEO publicly backs IT initiatives, like standing up and saying, look, everyone is using multi-factor authentication, no exceptions, it just sends a really powerful signal.
It shows ownership.
Right. Ownership from the top. It's not just IT nagging everyone. It's a business priority.
Okay, let's zoom in on that one. Multi-factor authentication, MFA. We hear about it all the time.
Constantly.
But this guidance really hammers home why it's so critical. They say, look, even basic MFA is way better than just a password.
True. Anything is better than nothing.
But they're also super clear that phishing is still, like, the #1 way attackers get that initial foothold.
Yep. overwhelmingly. And that's where it gets a bit more nuanced with MFA types.
How so?
Because while standard MFA, getting a text code, using an authenticator app, while that adds a good layer, there's a specific type they highlight as genuinely phishing resistant.
Okay. Which one is that?
It's called FIDO authentication, FIDO.
FIDO. Never heard of it put quite like that. How's it different?
So the cool thing is, it's probably already built into a lot of the browsers and smartphones people are using right now.
Really?
Yeah, and the magic basically is how it works. If a scammer tricks you into clicking a link and landing on a fake login page.
Which happens all the time.
Right. The FIDO protocol actually checks if the website is legitimate before it lets the authentication happen. Your security key or built-in authenticator literally won't work on the fake site.
Whoa. So even if you type your password into the fake site.
It doesn't matter. The FIDO part of the login fails because the site isn't real. Your credentials, that second factor, it never even gets sent to the attacker.
That sounds incredibly powerful, like truly stops phishing in his tracks for that login.
It really does for the methods that use it. So the recommendation becomes kind of a three-part shield. Use cloud-hosted email, use devices that are secure by design, we can talk about that more, and use FIDO authentication wherever possible.
And that combo significantly reduces your risk profile.
Hugely, especially against those common initial access methods.
Okay, wow. So let's loop back to that security program manager role then. What else are they doing day-to-day besides the IRP and TTXs?
It's definitely a varied role. A big part is training, making sure all employees understand their security responsibilities.
Like what sort of things?
The basics. Recognizing phishing emails or texts, how to enable their MFA properly, the importance of not clicking suspicious links, and crucially, who to tell and how quickly if they do see something weird.
So general awareness and knowing the procedures.
Exactly. Plus, writing and updating that IRP, running those quarterly TTXs we talked about, and then, importantly, actually checking that MFA is being used everywhere it should be. Compliance.
Right, making sure people are actually doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And what about the IT lead, the person handling the tech side? What are their specific tasks?
Okay, so the IT lead has some really critical hands-on responsibilities. First off, MFA again. But from the tech side, it's not enough to just ask nicely.
Right.
They need to use the technical controls in the systems, like in Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, to actually mandate MFA. And they need to actively hunt down any accounts, especially admin accounts that aren't protected, and get them secure.
Admin accounts seem like a huge target.
Oh, absolutely. If an attacker gets admin access, it's often game over. So MFA on all admin accounts is like table stakes, non-negotiable.
Okay, what else for IT?
Patching, keeping software up to date. But not just randomly patching. They specifically mention CISA's KV catalog, known exploited vulnerabilities.
Ah, the list of vulnerabilities hackers are actually using right now.
Precisely. Patch those first. Prioritize based on real-world threat. Then, backups. Doing them isn't enough.
Testing them.
Testing them thoroughly. Practicing both full restores and, maybe more commonly, just restoring specific files or systems. And having a documented plan. How long does it take us to restore? What are the steps?
Knowing your recovery time objective.
Exactly. And finally, a couple of endpoint things. Taking away administrator rights from regular user laptops, most people don't need them for daily work, and turning on disk encryption for laptops.
Why the encryption piece?
Simple. If a laptop gets lost or stolen, the data on it is unreadable without the password. Protects sensitive information.
Got it. This also kind of leads into that secure by design idea you mentioned, and rethinking the whole IT setup.
Yeah, the core idea there is to deliberately choose and build your IT infrastructure using technologies where security isn't an afterthought, it's baked in from the start.
Reducing the attack surface, is that the term?
That's the one. Think of your whole IT system, servers, laptops, software, network connections as having potential weak spots attackers can target. That's your attack surface.
Yep.
Secure by Design aims to make that surface as small and as hardened as possible, which naturally brings up the whole on-prem versus cloud debate.
Right. And the guidance seemed pretty opinionated on that one, leaning heavily towards the cloud.
Very much so. It strongly recommends migrating away from hosting things like your own email server or file shares on-premise.
Why such a strong push?
Well, the argument essentially is that securing on-premise infrastructure properly requires significant resources, constant vigilance, and specialized expertise that, frankly, most small businesses just don't have.
It's complex and expensive to do right.
Extremely. So they directly recommend moving to secure cloud cloud platforms, specifically mentioning Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, because those providers handle a lot of the underlying security infrastructure for you.
Okay. And then they also talked about secure endpoints.
Yeah, tying into that secure by design idea, they specifically highlighted devices like Chromebooks and iOS iPads, basically.
What makes them stand out?
They're built from the ground up with a security-focused operating system, fewer vulnerabilities, automatic updates, sandboxing applications. It all adds up.
So switching to devices like that can shrink the attack surface even more.
Dramatically. And think about ransomware. If most of your users are on, say, Chromebooks, and all your critical data lives in the secure cloud,
Then even if a device gets hit, the damage is limited.
significantly limited. Your core data is safe and accessible from another device. It changes the whole equation for business continuity.
Wow. Okay, so that's a really solid, practical set of recommendations. Seems very actionable for a small business.
Yeah, it focuses on high-impact, achievable steps.
So now we get to the interesting twist.
Right, the context around the agency providing this advice.
Because the same agency, CISA, has been in the news quite a bit recently, facing some, well, pretty serious scrutiny and even proposed budget cuts.
Yes, this is where it gets complex. There's a proposal on the table for a really substantial budget cut in 2026. We're talking almost $500 million.
Wow, $500 million. What's the reason given for such a huge cut?
The stated rationale is about refocusing the agency onto what are described as its core missions, primarily defending federal government networks and securing the nation's critical infrastructure, power grids, pipelines, financial systems, that sort of thing.
Okay, so refocusing, and part of that involves cutting, what was the phrase? Weaponization and waste.
That was the phrasing used, yes. The proposal talks about getting rid of offices or programs that are seen as duplicative, overlapping with what other state or federal bodies are doing.
All right, that sounds potentially bureaucratic.
Yeah.
But then it gets more specific, right?
It does. It specifically targets programs involved with countering what the proposal calls so-called misinformation and propaganda.
So-called. Yeah.
And also cutting external engagement offices, things like international affairs coordination.
And the criticism seems to go beyond just duplication or focus. There are accusations about how these programs were operating.
Exactly. Really serious accusations. Things like that these programs essentially became a hub in the censorship industrial complex.
Strong words.
Very strong. Alleging they were used to infringe on First Amendment rights by coordinating with tech companies to target Americans for protected speech online.
And even claims that the president was targeted.
That claim was made, yes. And the overall narrative being pushed is that the agency became, quote, more focused on censorship than on protecting the nation's critical systems.
Implying that this focus led to actual security risks.
That's the implication, that mismanagement, inefficiency, and a focus on self-promotion potentially weakened its core security mission.
And wasn't there a separate fact sheet mentioned that made even bolder claims?
Yes, apparently another document doubled down, reportedly accusing the agency of prioritizing cooperation with big tech to, quote, target free speech over securing critical infrastructure.
And it even pointed out alleged security lapses within the agency itself.
Yeah, claiming that even CISA's own systems have fallen prey to attacks, seemingly to bolster the argument about misplaced priorities.
Now, this whole line of criticism, it didn't just appear out of thin air, did it? I seem to remember a House Judiciary Committee report touching on similar themes earlier.
That's right. There was a committee report, I believe last year or the year before, that expressed concerns about what it termed CISA's mission creep
Which it could creep in.
into areas like surveillance and censorship. There were specific allegations in that report about CISA acting as a sort of switchboard.
The switchboard.
Yeah, like receiving reports about alleged misinformation from various sources and then forwarding them to social media companies, effectively coordinating censorship efforts against Americans.
And the idea of a rapid response team for misinformation was also mentioned.
Yes, that the agency had considered creating an internal team specifically to counter narratives it deemed problematic, which raised red flags for the committee.
And the report also suggested that maybe some of these activities were outsourced.
That was another significant allegation, that after facing legal scrutiny, the agency shifted some of its content moderation coordination to a nonprofit organization.
A nonprofit funded by CISA itself.
Allegedly, yes.
Huh.
Funded by the agency, with the report claiming this was done to, quote, avoid the appearance of government propaganda.
Wow.
The report also mentioned internal documents suggesting unease even within CISA's own advisory committee about this kind of work and the potential for it to become public.
Okay, so we have this situation. On one hand, CISA is putting out this really practical, seemingly vital cybersecurity guidance for small businesses. Things like MFA, patching, backups.
Yeah, stuff that genuinely helps protect businesses.
But on the other hand, the agency is facing these really serious accusations about overstepping its bounds into censorship, potentially misusing resources, and now facing the possibility of massive budget cuts as a result.
Exactly. It's a definite tension.
So how do we square that? How do we reconcile the value of the cybersecurity advice with these serious concerns about the agency's other activities and its future?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It raises fundamental points about, well, what should an agency like this be doing? Where are the boundaries?
And what are the practical implications? Like, if those budget cuts happen, could it affect CISA's ability to even provide these kinds of resources and guidance that small businesses clearly need?
It certainly could. Less funding might mean fewer resources, less outreach, maybe scaling back programs like the KEV catalog or guidance development. It's a real possibility.
And there's that inherent conflict you mentioned earlier. The cybersecurity advice itself warns about phishing, which often uses misinformation.
Right. Exploiting trust, spreading false narratives to trick people.
Yet the agency giving that warning is being accused of going too far in trying to police information more broadly online. It's quite a paradox.
It really highlights the difficulty in drawing lines. What constitutes harmful misinformation or malinformation versus protected, albeit perhaps unpopular or incorrect, speech. And crucially, who gets to be the arbiter of that?
That's a huge debate.
A massive one. And if a CISA's focus does shift significantly, either due to budget cuts or political pressure or internal changes, well, where does that leave small businesses?
Do they need to become more reliant on private sector solutions or other government resources?
Potentially. It might mean needing to be more proactive in seeking out diverse sources of cybersecurity information and support, and perhaps vetting them more carefully.
So it really hammers home that for anyone listening, especially if you run or work for a small business, you need to be aware of both sides of this.
Absolutely. You need to implement those concrete security measures,
Right.
MFA, the patching, the backups, the secure configurations we talked about. That's non-negotiable.
Take the good advice regardless of the source's current troubles.
Exactly. But you also need to be aware of this broader context. Understand that the agency providing some of this guidance is under scrutiny, its mission might be in flux, and its resources could potentially change.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? I guess first, take those security recommendations seriously. They address real threats.
Definitely. Prioritize those actions.
But second, maybe ask yourself, how confident are you in the cybersecurity resources currently available to you? Are they stable? Are they focused on what you need most?
And what are your biggest concerns as this whole landscape, both the threats and the regulatory environment, keeps shifting? It's a lot to stay on top of.
It really is. Which brings us to maybe a final thought to leave you with.
Okay.
As we've kind of explored here, this whole world of information, misinformation, security, it's incredibly dynamic and complex. Staying informed isn't just about understanding the technical stuff like FIDO or patching.
No, it's broader than that.
It's also about understanding the players involved, the agencies, the companies, the debates that are shaping this landscape. So maybe the question to ponder is, what role do you think government agencies should play when it comes to tackling online information issues and cybersecurity threats? And how do you balance that necessary function with protecting fundamental individual freedoms like free speech?
That's a really important question. No easy answers there.
Definitely not. Something to think about. And remember, this deep dive was sponsored by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. So if you're looking for secure storage, particularly ransomware-proof options like air-gapped and immutable storage, check them out. You can contact sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.